Hey everyone, I'm Dustin, CEO of 630. I just want to say thank you for your purchase of the EVRYjourney Electric Tricycle. I know once you receive it, you're gonna love it. So much fun, carry things with you, and really get out there and enjoy the road and the parks and anywhere you want to go. Now, with that said, I just wanted to give you some tips and advice on how to safely ride your e-trike once it arrives, and walk you through some very, very important safety and assembly elements. Now, we have a whole assembly video you can find on our YouTube channel or on the website also in advance if you want to see how to do the assembly. But I wanted to take you through some key elements of the assembly. Now, number one, there's three really important bolts on this electric tricycle, or sorry, three really important bolt locations. Now, number one is this axle bolt. If you are doing the assembly at home, it's very important to pay attention to these tips. We do recommend professional assembly. That's always the best way to go. But if you're doing it at home, please pay attention to these tips. So this axle bolt up here, you're going to get the bike, front wheel will not be on. It is important to tighten those bolts to the point of not being able to tighten them anymore. Now, don't step on a wrench, don't kick a wrench down. You don't want to over tighten it to the point that you're going to strip out the threads and make it impossible for you to ever loosen it. But you want to be pushing it down to the point where it no longer can go any tighter. And remember, there's a bolt on either side, so both of those need to be as tight as you can get them to the hand. It is important that that wheel stays secure at all times when riding. Now, moving up here to the handlebars, you have two bolts, one on the stem here that allows the handlebars to tilt, and another here that allows the handlebars to be raised or lowered. The one right here for the tilting, again, very important with your Allen key to get that to the point of tightening it where it cannot be tightened anymore. And ideally, you would have a long Allen key with a handle that would allow you to get it as tight as possible. This bolt, if loose when riding, if you apply pressure down on the handlebars and that bolt is loose, the handlebars would slip, which could result in injury. So please ensure that bolt is as tight as you can get it with your hand pushing down. In addition is the raise and lowering bolt right here. Again, ensure that that is as tight as possible, because if you push down and that lowers, that could cause injury. Or if that came loose and your stem came loose, you would lose all ability to steer. And at that point, you would want to engage the brakes, stop, and figure out a way to get that bolt tight. Now, you also do the rear subframe assembly at home. So these four bolts back here that get tightened for the rear subframe assembly need to ensure, again, that those bolts are tightened to the point of not being able to tighten anymore, so your rear subframe does not come loose at any point in time. Now, moving on to the seat, you have your quick release right here. If you get on and that's not tight, the seat might go up or down. If you're riding and that's loose and you slip down, it may alarm you. Now, generally, you shouldn't fall off the bike. You would just lower down. But again, ensure your quick release is tight, nothing's moving. Put a little pressure down on it just to ensure it's not going anywhere. In addition to that, you have these two bolts up here, which are for tightening the tilt of the seat. You want to ensure those are tight as well, so your tilt doesn't go forward or backwards. If those are loose and the seat tilts backwards, it's possible you could fall off or slip off. So just ensure, test your seat like this, rock it back and forth a little, put a little pressure, and ensure that everything is tightened to the point that it's good and safe. Now, talking a little bit about the electronics and the operation of this e-tricycle to give you safe riding. When you turn on and power on your e-trike up here, on your display here, it is going to tell you your levels of pedal assist, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have your plus and minus here to adjust that. When you are stationary with your e-bike, mounting or dismounting, or even standing here, you want to ensure that the motor is in 0. If this says 0, that means nothing is engaged. That means I can push this throttle here and the bike will not move. That is very, very important. If you're pushing your e-trike or moving it anywhere, keep this in zero. Otherwise, if you accidentally hit this throttle with the motor engaged, the bike can get away from you. Or if you're sitting here unexpectedly and you hit that and the bike goes, it could cause injury. So ensure that that is in zero before you are riding. Now, once you're up and riding, or when you're prepared to start riding and you're in position, you can shift it into 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Now, I only recommend starting in level 4 or 5 from a dead stop if you are 225 pounds and over. If you are below 225 pounds, only start in levels 1, 2, or 3. There's enough thrust in the motor, even at those levels, to get you going. Once you're up and cruising, you can start to experience the higher levels of pedal assist. It is not safe to start from a dead stop and giving it all the power all at once. That's not practical. Also, again, could cause injury if you give it a jolt and you're not prepared for the power that the motor will give you. And again, over time, you will start to realize what you're comfortable with and how to safely ride. These are just tips for when you get your EVRYjourney e-trike, you're prepped and you can ease into it and get comfortable, so you're taking all precautions necessary to have a safe ride. Now, one of the most important elements of any e-bike, including this one, are the brakes. Now, the front brakes are these caliper brakes, and the rear brakes are actually a roller brake here. So the rear brakes are going to come pretty much pre-adjusted. You won't need to do much adjustment on those. Now, on the front brakes here, this is something, if you've never had experience adjusting caliper brakes before, we recommend having a professional adjust the brakes. And these front brake pads over time are going to wear down, especially if you do a lot of hill riding, or if you're just logging a lot of miles. We recommend every 100 miles you check these brake pads. Now, brake pads up here, very easy to see how much pad you have left and if your brakes are responsive or not as responsive. And as you use your e-trike more over time, the brake pads will naturally wear down, at which point the brakes will need to be continually adjusted to ensure that the brake pads are staying close enough to the rim. Because as you wear the brake pads down, in essence, the pads are getting further from the rim, meaning that the brakes are going to get looser. So in order to keep the braking power proper, you would need to tighten the brakes as the pads wear down or install new pads. But again, the pads should have a decent lifetime to them. You're just going to want to make sure that you're tightening and adjusting the brake pads. So the more miles you ride, that's something you want to check more frequently. And by pulling your levers up here, you can just start to tell how responsive or not responsive your brakes are, right? So very important that you adjust those. Okay, in addition to that are the rear fenders. These are also attached to the rear subframe here with 3 bolts. This is something else. You want to make sure these three bolts on either side are tight. If they're not tight, the fender could slip and move, and that's important that that doesn't happen when riding. So please ensure those 3 bolts, again, tightened to the point that you can't tighten them anymore. Find the position that you like the fender in and ensure that those bolts are tight. Now, I want to talk a little bit about riding your e-trike. We have other videos on our YouTube channel you can check out as well for more detail. But if you haven't been on a tricycle before, or it's been a very long time, tricycles ride differently than a 2-wheel bike. If when you receive your trike, it takes some getting used to, don't be alarmed. It is a totally different mindset and process to steering and driving a trike than it is driving a 2-wheel bike. Now, with that said, it's important that you learn how to distribute your weight and take turns. One tip, do not accelerate into turns on a tricycle. Get through the turn, slow down into the turn to ensure all 3 wheels stay on the ground. Once you are done turning, then you can accelerate. Unlike on a 2-wheel bike, which you want to make sure you're continuing at speed through the turn to stay balanced, on a tricycle, it's important to slow down into your turn, make the turn. Once you're done turning, start to reaccelerate. If you come into a turn accelerating too fast, it is possible to tip a tricycle over. Also, weight distribution. When you're taking turns, you want to make sure if you're turning this way, you're leaning the opposite. So lean away from the turn, just like that, right? That way, as you're turning this way, you're keeping the wheels on the ground. You will start to get the hang of how to distribute your weight while you're riding. It just takes a little time if you haven't ridden a tricycle, like I said before. So slow down into your turns, practice, leaning this way a little bit, leaning the other way to make sure you understand how to distribute your weight properly. If you accelerate or use a throttle into a turn with an electric tricycle, the possibility of tipping does exist. So make sure, slow down, get through your turn, and safely come out of the turn as well. Last tip, tricycles are not like bikes in the balancing sense, and you cannot ride a tricycle on an extreme hill perpendicular. So small hills, it'll be okay, but if you have a hill like this, cutting across that hill, if you're going to do that, you would need to lean very aggressively into the hill. But if you can at all avoid it, do not go horizontally across a hill. That is a very important safety tip, especially if you have a load in the back. And if things are shifting this way, there's a possibility and a risk of tipping over. So avoid that if you can. It's just important that you recognize tricycles drive differently than two-wheel bikes. You take different safety precautions that you wouldn't necessarily need to take on a two-wheel bike. Once you get up and riding on your trike, it's so much fun. It's great to be able to take things with you. And also the fact that you don't have to worry about the balance that two-wheel bikes require. You can just cruise around, enjoy the ride, and really, really have a great time. So if you have any other additional questions, please email us, the team at sixthreezero.com, or call us 310-982-2877. And thanks for joining the 630 family. And don't forget, it's your journey, your experience. Enjoy the ride.